Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
My grandparents risked their lives immigrating to the United States in the 60s to escape persecution by the communists. My entire family jokes about how my grandmother has always been some kind of Buddhist sage, but my grandfather has always been more Western. I recently went to visit them. As their favorite grandchild and the only one able to speak Chinese, the whole family has agreed that they would pass down their stories and some family secrets on to me. It's not like my idiot cousins care about them and my brother is busy with college. As an avid/ex/lurker, I thought it would be appropriate to post a very creepy story that my grandfather shared with me. I won't be sharing any family secrets or anything, that's for me to keep to myself. However, I will be providing you all with enough information to understand the context of the situation that they were in. It's a bit of a long one, and it's a little far-fetched, but I will be writing this in a way that makes sense to all of you. This is one that's always stuck, and we've never had any answers for it. I'll try as best I can not to dramatize it or add anything unnecessary. My grandfather was the youngest son of a doctor in a rural farming village in Fujian. For the purposes of this story, I'll call him by the Christian name that he took, Justin. The terrain here was and still is dense with forests and tall grass, and the air was humid and thick. His village was tucked between several large hills and cupped between mountains that stretched upwards into great green spires. This was a time of great political strife. Dispersed fighting between warlords and rivaling political factions dragged every person into the conflicts. He, being a young boy, was expected to secretly deliver messages for the burgeoning communist forces in the region. Please don't judge him for this, it was a very different time, and the factions were constantly at odds. He simply had to make certain choices. He would make the journey from his village to the neighboring village, where older communist students and teachers had established a clandestine base of operations, which was probably about 15 or 20 kilometers out, by bicycle. This trek took him through perilous terrain on questionable trails over a swampy forest. He would often make these treks alone in the dead of night, but sometimes he would be accompanied by an older teenage student for his own protection. We're going to call him Wang. Justin never really liked Wang. He was from a dirt-poor family of rice pickers, and his only real goal in coming with him would be to have a chance at killing a tiger or a Republican soldier with his bamboo spear, which he waved around all the time. Even to young Justin, Wang seemed like a moronic child. He would bark orders at Justin and make too much noise, and he was always afraid that Wang would attract attention. Wang was essentially the old Chinese version of that kid in high school who always wore camo everywhere. On a very foggy evening, Justin was tasked with delivering a large red envelope to the next town over, like he usually would be. He was not to open this envelope under penalty of death. The moon was dim that night, and the teachers who tasked him with the transportation knew it would give him better cover. He met Wang at the edge of the forest as the sun set, his straw hat obscuring his pockmarked face. "What took you so long, Justin? You realize that this is a very important mission, yes? You have to remember to be on time." Justin rolled his eyes. There was no real set time, and he understood that every mission was very important. Because Wang had no bicycle, so they had to make this trek on foot to stay together. Tonight, unlike usual, Wang took the lead since he was the only one with a lantern. It acted kind of like a flashlight because of the glass opening at the front, but that didn't do much to cut through the fog. Justin needed to keep telling him which roads to take and where to swap off onto new roads that weren't entirely visible, to which Wang would dismiss with, "Yeah, I knew that," or "Right, just as Comrade Shi told me." All of his barking began to annoy Justin, but he didn't want him to swing that spear at him, so he just shut up about it. While the first few kilometers of trail were relatively flat and easily accessible, they had to dismount the trail and cut left through the swampy areas of the forest to avoid bandits or soldiers. The sun had completely set by this point, and Justin was now thankful that Wang had brought his lantern. Still, the fog obscured their view of anything around them, and the dense grass did nothing to help them. Several times, Justin heard what sounded like 2 or 3 people marching around a few meters behind them. Wang also heard this, and they kept quiet as they made their way through. The padding of footsteps against the rocky ground was unnerving. It clearly sounded like several men marching all together alongside them at once, like they were being stalked by a party of soldiers in a line. They increased their pace. Wang decided to stop for a moment to look around just in front of a small ravine that sunk into a babbling stream. Justin noticed that when they stopped, the footsteps behind them marched around in circles for a moment. Then he heard a shallow thump noise like someone had dropped an incredibly heavy bag. Wang signaled for Justin to go into the ravine. As he turned around to climb down, Wang directed his lantern toward the forest behind them. Ramrod still, Wang drew his breath and suddenly began yelling and pounding his chest at the brush. He pointed his spear and fell silent again. The two of them heard not just 2 or 4, but several legs stomp on the ground and prance backwards. They heard a large mass whip through the grass like wind, and all of a sudden it was gone. Wang began laughing and loudly congratulating himself as they made their way downhill along the stream. But Justin knew better because from behind them he could still hear distant pattering. "Look, Justin, did you see that? Could you see? I'm like a real hero. There'll be beautiful girls singing songs about me one day. You too, of course. We're tiger hunters out here." Just as Wang was getting back on track down the ravine, the two of them spun around as a long, exaggerated moan came from the dense forest behind them. It sounded like an abnormally large tiger, and they could hear birds fluttering away from every tree the sound touched. Grandfather recalls knowing immediately that it wasn't a tiger. It sounded like one, but gurgled and distorted. He could only compare them to the helicopters he had heard much later in his life in America, except with a bellowing roar beneath it broken up by each gurgle. The roar trailed off into odd, high-pitched, squealing notes, a bit like the whine of cicadas but more concise and random. The same prattling sound pranced toward them, this time with multiple stomps hitting the ground at a quicker interval. They heard it pouncing around the brush just above them, flanking their right side. Immediately, Justin pulled Wang and told him to run. They sprinted down the stream, all the while listening to the multitude of stomping that was keeping pace with them along their right flank just above them, on what sounded like dozens of feet blasting into the dirt with each prance. Justin could hear low, loud panting coming from whatever was following them in tandem with each jump that it made, like a running ox. Eventually, they slid under a giant fallen tree, and the stream led off into a wide grove of flat greenery surrounding a large pond. Lotus flowers and water lilies bloomed out from the center of the grove, which Justin knew was not far from the next town. Wang panicked and spun around, and the two of them could see the silhouette of what looked like a tiger atop the fallen tree trunk, just a few meters away from them. At first, Wang shouted that it was a tiger, but then started shouting that it was a dragon. Its body was at least 3 times as long as any tiger they'd seen, and it was moving on 3 or 4 pairs of long, muscular legs, which was followed by a long, undulating segment of its body resembling a crocodile tail. The beast moved gracefully, almost like a fish, undulating up and down with every movement all the way to its tail. It seemed to stand head and shoulders above Wang, who was actually tall for his age. Its head was enormous and it crept toward them with loud stomps. It let out the same long, gurgling moan except at a much higher pitch. Wang cried out and jabbed at it with his spear. Justin backed up, ready to sprint right around the grove and toward the main road. Wang was crying as the creature made tiny snaps at him, now fixated on his spear. Justin could see their silhouettes in the fog as the beast backed him into the water, crouched and ready to tackle him. Even from this position, it came up to Wang's waist. Justin then picked up a handful of mud and threw it at the long, strange creature. It stopped for a moment and shook its head around, groaning in an agitated way, and Wang jammed his spear toward its head. At this point, Justin spun around and began running around toward the road. A high-pitched screech filled the air, and Wang made a mad dash into the swampy water. He was clearly trying to swim, but the water was too low for that, and the roots of the vegetation and flowers were snagging on his legs. Justin came to the water's edge and reached out for Wang's hand. While he did this, he saw the large black mass dip headfirst into the water and disappear. Wang almost reached Justin when he sunk very deep into the mud, to the point that his shoulders were peeking out of the water. He was crying and begging Justin to pull him out. Justin was a small child, though, and could hardly pull Wang against the weight of the mud and water. Wang had nearly gotten his hips out of the water when suddenly Justin felt his hand yank back violently from his grasp, and Wang was dragged back toward the water. He shrieked and cried, "Justin, please don't let him take me, please. Do something, hurry, please." Wang was grabbing a small tree root and crying out, and the creature's maw was now visibly yanking at him horizontally from the water. Justin threw his bag back toward the tree line and grabbed the same root that Wang was grasping to. He began to pull it back, but Wang lost his grip and slid back into the water. Wang flailed around, and Justin saw the creature prance out toward him. Its enormous mouth crashed down on his lower back. Wang tried to scream, but it only came out as gargled howling. Justin backed up, watching the thing gnash and roll as it dragged him deeper into the grove. He tried flailing away, but he was immediately dragged back under the surface of the water. Justin immediately spun around and dragged his bag with him away from the grove. When he got to the town, the professors commended him for his bravery. He tried to explain how Wang was attacked and eaten by some kind of monster, but the men were too busy with their papers to give it any thought. The students working with the professors told him that he was making it up for more commendations. Some students supported him and said that it may have actually been a crocodile or a tiger, and that Justin was just delirious. He was, after all, a small child, and small children have big imaginations. The group inevitably lost interest when the professors demanded their attention. Justin stayed the night and then was escorted back to his village with one of the local farmers on his rickshaw in the morning. Wang's family accused him of being a liar and of abandoning their son, but the local communist gangs defended him and shut the family up. The story was quickly hushed and forgotten within the following months. Anybody reading this should take it with a heavy grain of salt. It's the recounted experiences of a 90-plus-year-old man's childhood who has been the victim of harsh circumstances his whole life. Still, he's very educated and serious, and hardly believes in half the stuff that passes on this board. He's not the man to go around touting fantasy, is what I'm saying. I know I kind of stretched it a bit for dramatic effect, but that's how the story sounded to me, translated into English. Hope you all liked it.
I am a 42-year-old Englishman who lives and works in Beijing, China. About 5 months back, I moved in with my 19-year-old Chinese girlfriend to our flat on the 36th floor of a high-rise block. The building is part of a gated neighborhood which has several high-rise buildings in close proximity. Our building is the tallest, and from the windows of our living room, kitchen and study, we can clearly see the rooftops of the buildings opposite. It is quite usual to see people walking about on the rooftops, smoking cigarettes or exercising, that kind of thing. About 3 weeks after we had moved in, I was in the kitchen washing the dishes after lunch, and I happened to glance out of the window. I did a double take when I saw a man standing dangerously close to the edge of one of the buildings opposite. I can still recall clearly that he was wearing a white t-shirt and black trousers, which with hindsight seems unusual, as Beijing at that time of year is far too cold to be wearing only a t-shirt. He seemed to be in some distress, and I opened the kitchen window to shout at him to get away from the edge, but before I could do so, the man jumped from the rooftop. I ran into the living room and told my girlfriend what had happened, and we both quickly ran to the lift in a panic and went down to the ground floor, expecting to see a gruesome scene with people panicking and police and ambulances having been called. Instead, we found there was nothing that we expected. No body, no panic, nothing needing our help at all. There were people walking around, calmly going about their day. It was as if the whole thing had never happened. My girlfriend was angry at me afterwards because she thought I was playing a joke on her, but I know what I saw. All I can think now is, did I see a ghost? It might sound silly, but from that day on, I have tried to avoid looking out of the window whenever I'm in the kitchen. As if that wasn't creepy enough, a few weeks after the jumper incident, I was taking the lift down to the ground floor to go to work. As I mentioned, I live on the 36th floor, which is the top floor of the building. When the lift got to the 21st floor, it stopped and the doors opened. A little old lady walked in. She was short, I'd guess no more than 5 feet tall, and wearing typical clothes for an old Chinese lady. There was nothing spooky or ghostly about her. As she entered the lift, she looked up and gave me a big, open-mouthed grin. I noticed several of her teeth were missing. I smiled back at her, and the doors closed and the lift carried on going down. The lift next stopped at the 18th floor, and the doors opened again, but there was nobody there waiting to get in. When I looked around, the old woman had vanished. I know I didn't imagine her, and I am certain she hadn't got out of the lift without me noticing. Given how she reacted to the jumper, I didn't tell my girlfriend about this incident, and in fact, this is the first time I'm mentioning it to anyone. I haven't seen the old lady since. The strange thing is, The complex we live in is fairly new. It's only around 10 years old, so I don't think it is old enough to have ghosts. I wasn't really a believer in the supernatural before this all happened, but I really don't have an explanation for the things I've experienced.
In the summer of 2008, I went with a student ambassador program to China. I had just turned 17 and was with about 50 other kids from Wisconsin and Ohio. It was really my first time being away from home and without any other relatives. The trip lasted 2.5 weeks, and the group toured Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, and Hong Kong. It was a life-changing experience and fun. However, there were several things that happened while I was there. Some things I couldn't really explain. Here are some of them. The first thing that happened was probably in my mind the most frightening to me. The group was in Xi'an. Actually, during our stay in Xi'an, we stayed overnight in a smaller village. We stayed in a hotel, though, for one of the days, but I forgot what the smaller village was called. Anyways, we were at this hotel, and we basically had one floor to ourselves. There were 2 or 3 roommates in each room. We checked into the hotel, and we were all getting set in our room. We were instructed to meet in the hotel restaurant at a certain time, which was about an hour after we were getting our things set in our room. I remember at one point leaving the hotel floor with someone for something other than coming back upstairs to our floor. There were some people in the hall and others in their room. The person I was rooming with was in someone else's room at the time, and I walked back into the hotel room. I remember sitting in there by myself, listening to the others walking in the hall and sort of just organizing my bags. I also remember noticing that the room clock was not the correct time, so I had to check my cell phone to get the real time. I had my phone mostly turned off the entire trip because I made a stupid move and left my charger at home in Wisconsin. After what I thought to be only several minutes, the noise of people seemed to settle down, and I thought maybe they were all getting ready for dinner. I continued to sit in my room, and after another few minutes I thought that the halls were just maybe too quiet. I didn't think that it was that late, though, and that it was that close to dinner, so I just sat there again. Then I heard as if someone ran down the hall. It sounded to me like it came from the direction of the elevators and went down the hall. I instantly thought that it was just someone from the group just having fun because I heard the movement in the hall again. It sounded like it was at my end of the hall. I got up because the sound went away, and I took that as the person possibly left downstairs. I basically thought I should head down to dinner, and with that, I left my room. As I walked, I thought I heard what sounded to be someone about to leave their room. It was like a doorknob was turning, and I heard some movement behind me. I remember sort of looking back to the empty hall, but I didn't think much about it. I went to the floor where the restaurant was on, and the group leaders were standing there. They caught sight of me and kind of laughed and told me I was late for dinner. I remember being confused and not thinking I was that late, but I saw that all the students in the group were already seated. I had to sit with the leaders that night for dinner, and they told me that they were wondering who was missing, but they couldn't really decipher who it was. They stated I was gone for about 10 minutes. I just remember sitting there and thinking who was in the hall and in that room then. I even told them at dinner that I didn't think I was that late because I heard what sounded like people still in their rooms and in the hall when I was on my way down to the elevator. They just looked at me, somewhat amused and in wonder about what I was talking about. They didn't really press me any further on my statements, and we just went on with dinner. I'm pretty sure no employees were in the hall because the hotel was pretty vacant when we were there. I probably saw about 5 employees downstairs when coming in, and throughout our first few hours there, and I'm just pretty sure no one would just go into someone's room like that. Another thing that happened was during our homestay portion of the trip. About 4 people were assigned to a family in a small village outside either Xi'an or Shanghai, and at each homestay. I was assigned with 3 other girls in the group, and we were taken to the house we would be staying at, which would only be for about 2 days. I shared a room with a girl named Millie for the duration of the homestay. The room was a good size, and there were 2 full-size beds in it. On our first night there, I was lying there. At some point, I dozed off but woke up again. I just continued to lay there trying to sleep again, but after a few seconds, I heard what sounded like heavy, silent breathing. I thought that it was Millie, but I realized it sounded like it was coming from behind me. At first it didn't scare me because I thought maybe it was the AC kicking in, but it went away after I turned my head to look at the AC. I laid there again and brought the covers closer to me, and then it felt as though during this, like someone was pressing onto the end of the bed. Millie's bed was pretty much less than 5 feet from mine, and I could see her while this was happening, so it wasn't her. I just laid there and tried to just let the feeling pass, but it felt like it stayed there. I didn't want to look at the end, but I couldn't help myself, but no one was there. Nothing, it was just blank. I had a hard time getting to bed that night. I think maybe it was due to the constant traveling, though, but after an hour or so after the bed and breathing incident, the room got really dark, and I just pulled the covers over my head. There was another incident that happened in the house, and it was when I was upstairs alone. The 3 other girls were downstairs, and I had run back upstairs for something. I should note that the 4 of us had the second floor to ourselves, and we stayed in the 2 rooms upstairs. I was digging in my suitcase for whatever it was I needed, and remember hearing what sounded like someone being on the second floor. There was sort of a sitting area upstairs with a table, then the 2 rooms and a bathroom. The noise sounded like it was coming from the sitting area, and I thought maybe the family's son was upstairs. They had a 5-year-old son. I started to walk to the door since I thought maybe the son was playing with one of the toys that I saw upstairs, but no one was there. I walked downstairs, and the girls and the mom of the family were there, and maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, her son came in with 2 friends. Probably the final thing to happen while in China was during our last portion of the trip. We were in Hong Kong for the last 2 days of the trip, and were at the Kimberly Hotel. My roommate there was a girl named Mariah. At one point in the first night I went to take a shower, Mariah had left some time beforehand and I was in the bathroom. While showering, I heard someone talking in the room, and at some point the voice came to the door of the bathroom. I quickly thought that Mariah and someone else came back to the room, so I didn't think much about it. I got out, and while drying off and whatnot, I heard the talking again, but it sounded quieter. I opened the door to the room, and the room was empty. The first thing that came to mind was maybe they left, but I would have heard the door open and close since the room door was right next to the bathroom. Then I thought it was the leaders doing their nightly room checks, but it was far too early for that. I sat on my bed and soon Mariah came back, and sometime later the leaders came to do their room checks. I had asked her while we were watching some TV show if she came into the room at all. She of course shook her head no, and stated that she went with a few other people to walk around a part of Hong Kong with. And no, the TV was not on. We didn't really watch TV. Mostly we would only watch TV to watch commercials and see how different they were from the USA's.
This is a story that my friend Dee told me when I was in China for a vacation 2 years ago. I was visiting family members and Dee was a pen pal I had made prior to going there since I didn't know anyone there that could speak English. Anyways, Dee told me that when he had first moved to Shanghai, China, he found a really cheap place to stay that was close to his new job. The room he had rented was on the 3rd floor of an old house in which everyone had their own floor, and the kitchen and living room was all on the ground level floor. The owner of the home was this old woman, and her bedroom was on the 1st floor, and another woman was staying on the 2nd floor. When Dee began to move into his new room, the old woman told him not to use the closet in his room. She said it was dirty inside and had some missing floorboards, so it was not a good idea to put his stuff inside. The closet had been boarded up with some planks of wood. Dee agreed to that, and just used the closet in the hallway instead. After 2 weeks, Dee said that he had too much stuff and it was inconvenient for him to go to the hallway all the time to get certain things that he needed, plus his room is small. So he decided to remove the boards from the closet. He was going to get some paint and pick up some tools and see if he could fix up the closet himself. When he removed the boards and opened up the closet, he found some old clothes, which he threw away, and saw that there was nothing wrong with the closet at all. He moved all his stuff inside that new closet. One day he said he came home from work and was going to shower and change before going out again for the night. When he went inside his closet to get a change of clothes, he saw that all his clothes had been tossed around and wrinkled. He had them neatly folded before. He got really angry and assumed that maybe the roommate's daughter had been playing in his room and messed it up. When he asked the lady who lived on the second floor, she said that her daughter had not been over and she was told not to go upstairs anyways. He decided to ignore this for now. Another time, he said he was taking a steamy shower and suddenly felt a chilly gust of air blow into his bathroom. His window and door were not open and there are no vents either in his bathroom. He said he would also see a shadow of a human silhouette in his shower curtain every now and then. He realized that there was the possibility of ghost activity, but doesn't believe in that kind of stuff, so he just ignored it. One night, Dee and two of his friends went out for the night to party. Afterwards, they stopped by Dee's house for a little bit to have a cup of tea before leaving. Dee was in the kitchen browsing the cabinets to find out where the tea bags were. He usually places them in the pantry next to the stove, but he said it wasn't there for some reason. He thought maybe his roommates might have drank it all. While he was searching, he said out loud, "I wonder where the tea went." Suddenly, one of the cabinets slammed open and 2 boxes of tea bags just flew out onto the floor as if someone threw it. Both of his friends started screaming and got up and left. Dee said he packed his stuff that night, slept in the living room, and moved out 2 days later. The old lady got very angry at him for opening the closet and said this wouldn't have happened if he hadn't messed with the closet when he told her why he wanted to move out.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.